Lovecraft is remembered for the gods, the sleeping things beneath the sea, the ancient horrors buried beyond time, the vast forces so far above human understanding that even trying to comprehend them can leave a mind in ruins. But the real horror of his universe was never just the beings themselves. It was the people who heard something from the dark and answered. The people who looked at things that did not love them, did not need them, and still chose to worship. Today we'll be going through the 5 most terrifying cults in all of Lovecraft, going from the least terrifying to the most. Shall we begin? We begin with the Whateleys of Dunwich, and I'm starting here for a reason. Because when most people think of Lovecraftian cults, I think they picture distance first. Hooded figures in ruins, secret rites in forgotten caverns, strange chants rising out of the dark. But the Whateleys have always unsettled me more than that, because they do not feel distant at all. They feel domestic, rural, inherited. Like cosmic horror did not descend on Dunwich from somewhere else, but seeped slowly into the bloodline until nobody could remember where the family ended and the worship began. That is what makes them such a strong place to begin. They are not the largest cult on this list, and I do not think they are the most terrifying overall. But I do think they are one of the clearest examples in all of Lovecraft of a family becoming a church all by itself. And for me, Dunwich matters just as much as the Whateleys do, because the Dunwich horror does not introduce them in a healthy world and then ask them to corrupt it. The place is already wrong. The hills feel old in the wrong way. The standing stones, the whispered stories, the feeling that the land itself remembers rites no decent person was ever meant to see. When I read Dunwich, I do not get the sense of a normal village being invaded by evil. I get the sense of a place where evil has been sitting quietly for a very long time, waiting for the right bloodline to give it shape. Then you get to the Whateley house, and for me that unease sharpens into something worse. Lavinia is raised around black magic, old books, and inherited blasphemy. Old Whateley is not just some strange old man muttering over dusty pages. He is feared, and more importantly, he is teaching. That is the detail I keep coming back to. The moment forbidden knowledge starts passing cleanly from one generation to the next, it stops being eccentricity. It stops being private madness. It becomes doctrine. It becomes continuity. It becomes a cult. And by the time Wilbur is born, I do not think the Whateleys are even trying to hide what they have become. The barking dogs, the rumors, the open sense that something has entered the family line that should never have been there, all of it points to the same thing. Old Whateley does not act like a man hiding shame. He acts like a man participating in a plan. That, to me, is the real horror of the Whateleys. Not just that they worship the unknown, but that they make room for it inside the most intimate human structure there is. The family, the home, the bloodline. And that is what makes them a perfect place to start. What pushes the Whateleys from strange hill people into something I would call a real Lovecraftian cult is the fact that their worship does not stay at the level of belief. It moves into ritual. Then it moves into blood. And once it reaches that point, I think it becomes much harder to separate faith from transformation. Old Whateley is not just muttering about forbidden forces for the sake of atmosphere. He is preparing something. He speaks openly about Yog-Sothoth, about opening the gates, about the old powers getting back in if the right rites are performed in the right places. And the places matter. Sentinel Hill matters. The stone circles matter. The fires seen blazing at night matter. Because Lovecraft is not showing us a family with odd religious ideas. He is showing us a family carrying out a long-term operation. They are trying to bring the outside in, and Wilbur is the proof that something has already gone terribly right. That is the part I keep coming back to with the Whateleys. Wilbur is not simply a devoted son raised in a blasphemous household. He is evidence. His impossible rate of growth, his strange appearance, his need to stay covered, the panic animals feel around him, the constant cattle purchases that never seem to match the number of visible animals on the farm, all of it points to the same conclusion. The cult has crossed a threshold. This is no longer humans worshiping the inhuman from a safe symbolic distance. This is humans making the inhuman part of the family line itself. And behind Wilbur, always just out of sight until it is far too late, there is the other horror in the house. The unseen twin. The thing being fed. The thing growing faster than the walls can contain it. For me, that is where the Whateleys become more than just eerie occultists. They are not praying for power. They are breeding for access. They are turning ritual into biology and worship into inheritance. That is one of the foulest ideas Lovecraft ever returns to. The idea that if you serve the wrong force long enough, you do not merely contact it. You begin to resemble its purpose. And that, for me, is what makes the Whateleys so disturbing. They are not just worshippers. They are proof that in Lovecraft, devotion does not always stop at prayer. Sometimes it moves into the body, into the bloodline, into the future. But as horrifying as that is, the cult that comes next unsettles me even more, because the Whateleys still feel local, almost sealed off. The next one feels closer, more deliberate, more like a human being willingly stepping toward the dark with their eyes open. The cult at number 4 unsettles me for a different reason than the Whateleys do. The Whateleys feel inherited, sealed off, like a bloodline rotting in private. But the Dreams in the Witch House gives us something that feels more direct than that, more personal, more like a conscious step toward the dark. And once Lovecraft makes that shift, I think the horror changes with it. What I keep coming back to in this story is the figure at the center of it all, the Black Man. Lovecraft does not present him as some vague superstition drifting around the edges of old witch lore. He presents him as an old, recurring presence tied to hidden powers and forbidden transactions. And then he does something worse. He aligns that figure with Nyarlathotep, not in some loose symbolic way, but directly. He describing the Black Man as the messenger or deputy of terrible powers and connecting him to the name Nyarlathotep in the Necronomicon. That matters, because it turns what could have been just another witch legend into something cosmically real. The cult is not worshipping folklore. It is serving a messenger of the outer dark. And that is what makes this one so unnerving to me. It feels initiatory, transactional. You do not simply happen to be born into it the way Wilbur Whateley was born into Dunwich. Here, there is the sense of an invitation being offered, a compact being made, a signature demanded. In the Dreams in the Witch House, Walter Gilman keeps drifting deeper into visions of Keziah Mason, Brown Jenkin, and the Black Man, and the whole structure of those scenes feels less like random nightmare and more like recruitment. He is being drawn toward participation, toward consent, toward that terrible Lovecraftian moment where curiosity stops being passive and becomes complicity. And Brown Jenkin matters here too. I think people sometimes remember him as just the grotesque familiar, the rat thing with a human face and little hands. But in this context, he feels like proof that the witch cult is not symbolic. It has structure, intermediaries, a working system of contact between the human world and something far worse. The Black Man is not alone, and the rites around him are not dead remnants of some forgotten superstition. They are active, functioning, waiting. And that, I think, is where this cult starts becoming something more than just a cult horror. And I think that is the part of this cult that stays with me the most. Not just that it exists, but the way it operates. The Whateleys are horrifying because they show what happens when a family gives itself over to something inhuman for generations. But this feels different. This feels like a hand being extended, a threshold being opened, a human being asked, very quietly, to step across it. That is what makes the Dreams in the Witch House so effective to me. The horror is not built around one big ritual in a ruined church or some distant gathering on a stormy hilltop. It is built around repetition, the slow wearing down of the barrier between the ordinary world and the hidden one. Gilman does not encounter this cult all at once. He drifts into it, first through dreams, then through geometry, then through the room itself. The angles of the house, the impossible sense that space has started obeying rules that were never meant for human beings. By the time the Black Man begins to feel truly present, the story has already done something very nasty. It has made contact feel inevitable. And I think Lovecraft understood exactly how ugly that idea is. Because once the cult becomes a matter of invitation, everything changes. It is no longer just about strange people somewhere else doing forbidden things. It becomes about the possibility that someone like Gilman, educated, skeptical, modern, can still be drawn toward it if the conditions are right. That matters. It matters a lot. Because it means this cult does not depend on bloodline alone, or geography alone, or some decaying rural pocket cut off from the world. It can reach through fascination, through exhaustion, through the fatal human need to know what is on the other side of the wall. And the ritual that hangs over the story, especially in the scenes involving the strange procession, the hidden assembly, the sense of a sacrificial purpose closing in around Gilman, gives the whole cult a feeling I find more intimate than the Whateleys. Dunwich is horrifying, but it still feels like a local corruption, something festering in one family line. This feels closer to a system, a method, a path by which a human being can be drawn out of ordinary life and into service. Not because they were born to it, but because they were approached. That is where the black man becomes more frightening to me than almost anything in Dunwich. He does not just represent power, he represents access, a point of contact between human fear, human curiosity, and something much larger that is perfectly willing to use both. And once Lovecraft opens that door, I think the cult stops feeling like folklore and starts feeling like infrastructure. A hidden route into the outer dark. Something with rituals, intermediaries, and a way of bringing people over one at a time. But the cult at number 3 unsettles me even more, because this one still lives partly in the language of witchcraft, dreams, and old hidden rites. The next cult feels colder than that. More organized, more urban, less like a secret surviving in the cracks of the world, and more like something that built itself a place right in the middle of civilization and kept feeding there for years. The cult at number 3 feels different the moment I think about it, because up to this point, the horror has either been rural or hidden in older forms. Dunwich feels buried in the countryside. The witch cult feels like something surviving in dreams, in forgotten rites, in places where the world has already thinned. But the Church of Starry Wisdom does something else entirely. It exists inside a city. It builds itself into ordinary life. And that shift makes it feel colder to me. In The Haunter of the Dark, the church is not just a rumor or a passing mention. It is a physical place, a building that people know exists, even if they avoid it. And that matters, because it means this cult is not hiding in the same way the others are. It is not a family secret like the Whateleys. And it is not some drifting occult current like the witch cult. It has a location, a structure, a presence that has persisted long enough for the surrounding community to recognize it and quietly stay away. And the history tied to it only makes that worse. The Church of Starry Wisdom is associated with disappearances, strange rites, and a general sense that something inside that building was never meant to be seen. Lovecraft describes it as a place people avoided, a place with rumors of sacrifice, and eventually, a place that had to be raided and shut down. That detail sticks with me, because it tells you this cult became visible enough, active enough, that something had to be done about it. And even then, it does not feel like it was truly removed, just interrupted. And then there is the object at the center of it all, the shining trapezohedron. I keep coming back to this because it changes the nature of the cult entirely. This is not just a group of people worshiping something distant and abstract. They have a tool, a medium, something that allows direct contact with whatever answers from the other side. The trapezohedron is described as a kind of window, a way of seeing into another dimension, of perceiving something that should not be perceivable. And the moment you introduce something like that, the cult stops being speculative. It becomes functional. That is what makes the Church of Starry Wisdom alarming to me. It feels like an operation, not a scattered belief system, not a half-understood tradition passed through generations. An operation with a location, a method, and a way to establish contact with something real, something that does not belong here. And the worst part is how ordinary the setup is on the surface. A church, a building, a place that, in any other context, would represent safety, community, and meaning. Lovecraft takes that structure and hollows it out, fills it with something else, and leaves it standing in the middle of a city where people can walk past it without ever fully understanding what is inside. That, to me, is where this cult starts becoming something worse than what we have seen so far. Not because it is louder or more violent, but because it feels deliberate, built, maintained. Like someone at some point made the decision to create a stable point of contact between the human world and something that should never have had one. What makes the Church of Starry Wisdom more disturbing the longer I sit with it is not just the rituals or the rumors surrounding it. It is the fact that this cult found a way to establish contact and keep it open. Because the shining trapezohedron is not just a symbolic object. It is not a relic people gather around to feel closer to something distant. It is described as a kind of window, a way of seeing into another space, another layer of reality, where something is looking back. And that detail changes everything. The moment a cult moves from belief to interaction, it stops being abstract. It becomes dangerous in a much more immediate way. In The Haunter of the Dark, the trapezohedron allows the observer to perceive a presence tied to the darkness itself, something that cannot fully exist in light. That limitation matters. It means the entity connected to it is not simply waiting somewhere far away to be worshipped. It is dependent on conditions, on environment, on the careful maintenance of darkness, secrecy, and ritual in order to manifest. And that gives the cult a role that feels much more active than anything we have seen so far. They are not just servants, they are facilitators. And once you think of it that way, the entire structure of the church starts to feel deliberate in a different sense. The building is not just a place of gathering, it is a controlled environment, a space designed to sustain contact. The rumors of sacrifice, the disappearances, the sense that people went in and never came back, all of it begins to read less like scattered horror and more like a system feeding something on the other side. That is where this cult starts to feel colder to me than the ones before it. The Whateleys blur the line between human and inhuman through blood. The witch cult blurs it through initiation and invitation. But the Church of Starry Wisdom stabilizes that connection. It creates a fixed point where the barrier is consistently thinner, where the act of reaching into the dark is no longer rare or accidental, but repeatable. And I think that is the detail that lingers. The idea that someone, at some point, did not just stumble into contact with something beyond human understanding, but built a way to return to it. Again and again. A method. And once a method exists, the horror stops feeling like an isolated incident and starts feeling like something that can spread. By the time we get to this point, the pattern starts to break. Up until now, each cult has felt like something you could locate. A farmhouse in Dunwich, a hidden path through dreams and rituals, a single building in a city where something unnatural was allowed to take root. There was always a center, a place you could point to and say, that's where it's happening. But the Cthulhu cult does not give you that. And I think that's the first thing that makes it different. In the Call of Cthulhu, the story does not begin with some grand, unified organization revealing itself. It begins with fragments, a sculpture here, a journal entry there. Strange dreams reported by artists, poets, and people who seem unusually sensitive to something they cannot explain. At first, none of it looks connected. It feels scattered, almost meaningless. And then, slowly, it starts to align. Inspector Legrasse's raid is where it sharpens. Deep in the swamps of Louisiana, he and his men stumble onto a ritual already in progress. A group of worshippers gathered around a strange idol, chanting in a language no one present can understand. The scene is chaotic, almost primitive. Drums, firelight, bodies moving in ways that feel less like worship and more like surrender. And at the center of it, the figure they are invoking. Cthulhu. That moment could have been enough. A hidden cult, discovered and dismantled. But it doesn't end there. Because what follows is the part that always sticks with me. When the idol is examined, when the accounts are compared, when other testimonies begin to surface, it becomes clear that this was never just a local phenomenon. The same imagery appears elsewhere. The same phrases, the same underlying structure of belief. Accounts from vastly different parts of the world start lining up in ways that should not be possible if this were just one isolated group. And that is where the shape of the cult changes. This is not a single organization spreading its influence outward. It feels more like something that has already spread, long before anyone thought to look for it. Separate groups, separated by oceans, by language, by culture, all arriving at the same object of worship. Not because they were taught by the same source, but because they are responding to the same signal. That is the detail I keep circling back to. Because once you see it that way, the Cthulhu cult stops feeling like a network you could dismantle. It starts to feel like a pattern that keeps reappearing wherever the conditions are right. Something embedded in human experience itself, waiting for the right moment to surface again. And the fragments never fully resolve into a complete picture. They don't need to. The journal entries, the sculptures, the dreams, the testimonies, they all point in the same direction without ever forming a single, clean narrative, which makes it harder to confront, harder to contain, because you cannot point to one place and say that's where it is. It has already been in multiple places at once, and it always has been. And I think that is the part that makes this cult harder to deal with than anything we have seen so far. Not just that it is widespread, but that it does not seem to rely on the same structures the others do. That is what makes it feel different. More passive on the surface, but in a way that becomes more unsettling the longer I think about it. The worshippers are not being directly instructed in the same visible way. There is no single figure like the black man guiding them. No central artifact like the trapezohedron acting as a window. And yet the belief persists across distances that should have broken it apart completely. And the closest thing the story gives us as an explanation is something much worse than organization. Dreams. The idea that certain people, especially those who are more sensitive, more creative, more unstable, begin to experience the same visions, the same impressions, the same sense that something vast is stirring beneath the surface of the world. And those visions are not random. They align. They reinforce each other. They begin to form something like a shared language, even between people who have never met. That is where the cult starts to feel less like something humans built, and more like something that built itself around a presence that cannot be ignored. Because if enough people see the same thing, feel the same pull, arrive at the same conclusion without ever speaking to one another, then the question changes. It is no longer, who created this cult? It becomes, what is causing it to form? And once that question is on the table, I think the entire structure of the cult shifts again. Because it suggests that Cthulhu does not need to reach out in any direct, intentional way. It does not need to recruit. It does not need to persuade. Its mere existence, its mere presence somewhere beyond reach, is enough to distort human thought, to pull certain minds toward it, to create belief without ever asking for it. That is a very different kind of horror. Because it means the cult is not maintained through effort. It is maintained through inevitability. As long as Cthulhu exists, as long as whatever it is continues to press against reality in whatever way it does, there will always be people who respond, people who dream, people who interpret those dreams as revelation rather than warning, people who decide that what they are experiencing is not something to run from, but something to follow, and the people who gather around it, who chant, who carve idols, who wait for the moment when the stars are right, are not necessarily the architects of that belief. They are the result of it, the surface expression of something much deeper that has already taken hold. And that, to me, is what makes the Cthulhu cult so difficult to fully grasp. It will keep happening over and over, whether you like it or not. At the top of this list, I keep coming back to Innsmouth. Because by the time Lovecraft takes us there in the shadow over Innsmouth, the horror has changed shape again. We are no longer dealing with a family line cut off in the hills, or a hidden path into witchcraft, or a single church where dangerous contact is being maintained behind closed doors. Innsmouth feels like the end stage, the point where worship has spread so far and sunk so deep into ordinary life that it no longer looks separate from the town at all. That is what makes the esoteric order of Dagon so terrifying to me. It does not feel like a cult living underneath society. It feels like a cult that has become society. And Lovecraft builds that feeling almost immediately. The moment the narrator approaches Innsmouth, the place carries the wrong kind of stillness. The town is decayed, yes, but decay alone is not the point. Plenty of towns in Lovecraft are decayed. What matters here is the atmosphere of corruption that seems to have settled into everything at once. The streets, the buildings, the people watching from windows or standing in doorways just a little too long. The sense that the town is not merely poor or neglected, but altered by a system of life that has been running in secret for generations. Then the order comes into view, and everything starts lining up. Because the esoteric order of Dagon is not some rumor whispered about one house at the edge of town. It is a named institution, a public one. It rose under Obed Marsh after he returned from the South Seas with stories of strange gods beneath the ocean and bargains that could bring wealth and abundance. That detail matters because it tells you exactly how this cult took hold. It did not conquer Innsmouth in one burst of madness. It made itself useful first. The old churches lost power. The order rose in their place. Fish returned. Gold appeared. Prosperity came back to a dying town. And the town accepted the price before it fully understood what the price was. That, to me, is where the esoteric order of Dagon becomes worse than anything else on this list. It does not survive in the margins. It takes the center. It becomes part of the town's leadership, part of its economy, part of its rhythm. People do not merely worship through it. They live through it. By the time the narrator arrives, Innsmouth no longer feels like a normal community with a hidden cult buried inside it. It feels like a completed conversion, a place where the old human framework has already been hollowed out and replaced with something else. And once a cult reaches that stage, I think the danger changes completely. Because at that point, you are no longer dealing with believers. You are dealing with a whole environment shaped by belief. An entire town teaching the same lesson with every stare, every silence, every crumbling building facing the sea. And if the first half of Innsmouth's horror is social, the second half is biological. That is the detail that puts the esoteric order of Dagon above every other cult in Lovecraft for me. It does not stop at ritual. It does not stop at doctrine. It does not even stop at total community capture. It goes further than that. It reaches into the body, into heredity, into the future. It makes worship irreversible. The bargain at the center of Innsmouth is simple in structure and monstrous in consequence. Obed Marsh and the town trade with the deep ones. In return for fish, gold, and renewed prosperity, they give them devotion, secrecy, and eventually blood. Not metaphorical blood, family blood. The line between worshiper and worshipped begins to collapse, and once it collapses, there is no clean way back. That is where the Innsmouth look becomes so much worse than just a visual marker. It is not there for atmosphere alone. It is evidence. A visible sign that the town's religion has entered the body and started rewriting it. The bulging eyes, the strange gait, the facial structure, the sense that the human form is slowly being pulled toward another pattern altogether. These are not just followers of the deep ones. They are becoming kin to them. And that, I think, is why this cult lands at number 1 without much difficulty for me. The Whateleys flirt with inhuman blood. The Cthulhu cult responds to dreams and distant pressure from something vast beneath the sea. But the esoteric order of Dagon builds an entire civic life around surrender and then seals that surrender into the next generation. It creates a society where the reward for obedience is transformation, and where that transformation is treated not as punishment, but as fulfillment. That is such an ugly Lovecraftian idea. The notion that the final stage of worship is not enlightenment, or power, or union with the divine in any comforting sense. It is the slow erasure of the human self in exchange for belonging to something older and colder. And the story's last twist is what really locks it into place. The narrator is not safely outside this horror, observing it from a scholarly distance the way so many Lovecraft protagonists try to. He is tied to it, pulled into it. By the end of the story, Innsmouth stops being a place he escaped from and becomes the truth he was always moving toward. That is why I put the esoteric order of Dagon at the top. Because this is the cult in Lovecraft that succeeds most completely. It captures the town, the bloodline, the body, and finally the future. By the time you understand what it has done, there is nothing left to interrupt. The worship has already won.